Estel McCurdy has spent 28 long years on death row, his days blurring into a grim countdown behind the walls of San Quentin. But nothing could erase the horror of that March afternoon in 1995, when he lured and trusting 8-year-old girl named Maria Piceno into his car with a casual wave, drove her to a lonely field, and, after she fought and screamed, pressed his hand over her mouth and nose until her small body went still forever. To unravel how a Boy Scout from a dusty farm town turned into a man capable of such evil, we have to rewind to the cracked sidewalks and hidden pains of his childhood, where the first fractures formed. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from as we dive into this chilling story. Estel McCurdy came into the world in 1960, in the sun-baked heart of California's Central Valley, a place called Wasco, a speck of a town in Kern County where the air smelled of dust and diesel, and dreams often dried up like the summer fields. Wasco wasn't glamorous. It was oil rigs and cotton farms, migrant workers chasing the harvest, and families scraping by on minimum wage grit. Gene was the firstborn in a household of 4 kids, the son of Annetta and Estel McCurdy, working-class folks who poured everything into keeping the lights on. Money was a ghost in their home. Meals stretched thin with beans and bread, hand-me-down clothes that never quite fit right. Annetta later remembered her boy as the one who pitched in without being asked, hauling water jugs or fixing a loose porch step, his small hands already calloused from chores that started before dawn. He was always helpful, she'd say, her voice cracking years later in a courtroom, as if clinging to that image could hold back the storm. But poverty wasn't the only shadow over the McCurdy place. It whispered through the walls in ways no child should know. Gene and his younger sister, let's call her the one who carried the family's quietest scars, shared a bond that twisted early, fed by secrets too heavy for kids to hold. It started innocently enough, or so a 5-year-old might tell it. Playful touches that crossed lines, turning into something darker. By the time Gene was 7 or 8, those games had evolved into fondling, him guiding her hand or pressing against her in the dim corners of their cramped house. It went on like that, off and on, for more than a decade. Simulated acts, attempts at more, even a drive one night when she was a teen to a remote spot where confusion and coercion blurred into a brief, tear-streaked moment of oral contact. She resisted at first, but the weight of family loyalty, the fear of shattering their world, kept her silent. Gene, looking back as an adult, called it consensual, a word that hangs like smoke, hiding the power imbalance of siblings where one is bigger, older, the protector turned predator. And it wasn't just him carrying that poison. Both Gene and his sister confessed to each other about their uncle, the man who visited with candy and stories, but left behind touches that lingered like bruises under clothes. He molested them both, planting seeds of violation in soil already tilled by hardship. No one spoke of it then. In a tight-knit farm town like Wasco, shame was a lock, and families like the McCurdys bolted it tight. Gene didn't lash out in school. No playground brawls or teacher notes home about hot tempers. He was the quiet kid, the one who earned merit badges in Boy Scouts for knot tying and campfire tales, marching in parades with a uniform starched by his mom's weary hands. Teachers saw potential, a boy who read ahead, who helped classmates with math when recess called. By high school, he was steady, graduating in the late 70s without fanfare or failure, his transcript clean as the chalkboard he wiped after class. Yet those early fractures simmered beneath the surface, unseen but eroding. Gene's helpfulness? Maybe it was a mask for the guilt gnawing at him, a way to atone without words. The molestations didn't stop until his sister hit her mid-teens, around 16 or 17, when she finally pulled away, the games fading into awkward silences at the dinner table. He never faced charges, never saw a counselor's door. Small-town life in the 60s and 70s didn't hand out therapy like homework. Instead, Gene channeled his energy outward, enlisting in the U.S. Navy right after graduation. The military promised structure, escape, a paycheck to send home. Stationed on ships slicing through Pacific waves, he rose to petty officer first class, earning a Naval Achievement Medal for sharp seamanship and crew reliability. To his squadron mates, he was solid, joking over chow, pulling extra watches without complaint. No rap sheet trailed him. His record gleamed like polished brass. But whispers of the past echoed in quiet moments. As a grown man in his 30s, Gene sat his sister down one evening, eyes downcast, and apologized. "I'm sorry for what I did," he said, voice thick. He admitted the uncle's abuse had warped him young, a cycle he couldn't break clean. And then the raw truth. One reason he'd never married, never started a family of his own, was the terror that the darkness inside might touch his own kids. "I didn't want to hurt anyone like that," he told her. He swore he had no craving for children, no predatory gaze in crowds, just a man haunted by boyhood ghosts, fighting to keep them chained. Those chains held, outwardly, through Navy deployments and base life in Lemoore, just a short drive from Wasco's familiar dust. Gene dated women his age, kept a tidy apartment, volunteered at church potlucks. But as the 90s wore on, stress cracked the facade, quitting smoking cold turkey, snapping at shipmates over nothing, eyes darting like he sensed eyes on him. What happens when buried secrets start to claw their way up, demanding air? In the spring of 1995, as cherry blossoms bloomed on distant shores, Gene's ship set sail for Japan. Far from home, in the endless blue, would the boy from Wasco finally confront the man he'd become, or let the shadows steer him into the abyss? The spring of 1995 hung heavy over Lemoore, a quiet farming town in California's Central Valley where kids still biked to the corner store without a second thought. But on March 27th, that innocence cracked wide open. Gene McCurdy, the 35-year-old Navy petty officer who'd always seemed so steady, polite nods to neighbors, crisp uniform on base, woke up that Monday with a restlessness he couldn't shake. The ghosts from his past, those buried secrets of abuse and shame, had been stirring more lately. Quitting smoking had left him jittery, his mind racing like the diesel trucks rumbling past his apartment. He needed a distraction, something to numb the edges. So he headed out early, his white Ford Ranger pickup gleaming under the midday sun, mustache neatly trimmed, wearing a blue t-shirt with a white stripe across the chest. By around 3 p.m., McCurdy pulled into the parking lot of the Willow Plaza Shopping Center, a strip of everyday spots, a Food King grocery, video rental shops, nothing fancy. He'd been there before, close to the Naval Air Station where he worked as a mechanic on fighter jets. Today, though, his stops felt frantic, almost ritualistic. At 3:28 p.m., he rented 3 unrated adult videos from one store, films with titles that promised escape into the forbidden. 6 minutes later, at 3:34, he grabbed 3 X-rated movies from another spot down the way. By 4:10 p.m., he doubled down, renting 3 more pornographic tapes from a third shop, his credit card receipts later painting a picture of a man chasing shadows in broad daylight. These weren't random grabs. They were fuel for whatever storm was brewing inside him, a man teetering on the edge of the darkness he'd sworn to keep locked away. Meanwhile, 2 blocks from the plaza, 8-year-old Maria Piceno bounced out her apartment door, her dark hair in pigtails, clutching a few dollars from her mom, Arcelia Farrell. Maria was all spark, 3rd grader with a gap-toothed grin, the kind of kid who chased butterflies and dreamed of being a teacher. Arcelia, a single mom juggling 2 other little ones, handed her the cash around 3 p.m. "Go get some tuna and milk from Food King, Mija. Be quick." It was a routine errand, the store just a hop, skip, and jump away on Willow Avenue. Maria skipped off in her pink shirt and shorts, the Central Valley sun warming her shoulders, no clue that this walk would steal her last breaths. Inside Food King, surveillance caught the ordinary magic. Maria at 3:18 p.m., paying for her tuna and milk at the register, receipts stamped forever. She wandered the aisles a bit, maybe eyeing candy she couldn't afford, her small bag swinging. At 3:43 p.m., a shopper named Eric Douglas spotted her near the ice cream, looking lost but not scared. 5 minutes later, he saw her again in a neighboring store in the plaza. That's when paths crossed. Around 3:50 p.m., another witness, Michael Jackson, glanced out his car window and saw McCurdy, tall, mustached, in that blue t-shirt, chatting with Maria outside the grocery. He held her hand, gentle-like, opening the passenger door of his truck. Maria climbed in, the door clicked shut, and McCurdy slid behind the wheel. Jackson drove off, glancing back. No sign of the girl. Just a man and his truck, vanishing into the afternoon haze. What happened next turned a sunny day into every parent's nightmare. McCurdy didn't head home. Instead, he drove north, away from Lemore's familiar streets, toward the open stretches of Kern County, dusty fields giving way to scrubland, the Kern River glinting in the distance. Poso Creek, a sluggish waterway snaking through remote farmland about 60 miles away near Bakersfield, became his grim destination. It was a spot he knew well. His parents' home wasn't far, a place of childhood visits now twisted into something sinister. In the truck's cab, Maria's confusion turned to fear. Why this stranger? Why so far? Prosecutors later pieced it from evidence and McCurdy's own words. He tried to calm her with talk of a ride or a game, but her questions grew sharp, her body twisting away. When they reached a lonely pull-off near the creek, tall grasses whispering against the truck's tires, he pulled her out, the air thick with the smell of earth and water. The assault was brutal, a frenzy born of fractured urges. McCurdy, later admitting fragments in interviews, forced lewd acts on her small frame, his hands pinning her as she fought with all the fury an 8-year-old could muster. Kicks, screams echoing off the empty fields, nails scratching for freedom. But he was stronger, the weight of his regrets crushing her spirit. When her cries threatened to draw eyes from the road, he clamped his hand over her mouth and nose, pressing hard, her chest heaving in vain. She bucked once, twice, then went limp, her brown eyes staring blank at the sky. Suffocation stole her last gasp, no more than a minute or two of terror that echoed like thunder in the silence. Bruises bloomed on her arms from the struggle, non-fatal blows from his grip, but the final theft was her air, her life. He didn't undress her fully. Her pink shirt and shorts stayed on, a cruel nod to the innocence he'd shattered. Then, in a haze of panic, he dragged her body to the creek's edge, the water cold and murky, and let it slip in, weighted by rocks or current to sink from sight. By dusk, he was gone, the field empty again, as if nothing had broken. The impact rippled like a stone in still water, shattering Lemore's fragile peace. Arcelia waited at first, then paced, her heart pounding as minutes stretched to hours. By evening, police swarmed the plaza, volunteers combing fields, helicopters thumping overhead. "Where's my baby?" she sobbed to reporters, her voice raw, clutching Maria's favorite doll. The town, already scarred by 2 prior child abductions in the area, one just a year before, huddled in fear. Playgrounds emptied, parents shadowed their kids every step. When Maria's body surfaced on April 9th, bloated and tangled in reeds, the coroner's verdict, homicide by suffocation, confirmed the unthinkable. Arcelia's world collapsed. Nightmares of her daughter's pleas, therapy sessions for the family, a fear so deep it locked doors that once stayed open. "She was my light," Arcelia testified later, tears carving paths down her face, and he snuffed it out. The community mourned with vigils, pink ribbons fluttering like lost butterflies, but trust? That bled out with Maria, leaving scars that no trial could heal. McCurdy, though, slipped back into routine, the monster masked once more. After dumping the body, he swung by a motel in Hanford around evening, reserving a room he never used, maybe a planned hideout, or just blind instinct. Then home to his Lamore apartment, where neighbor Mary Smith heard a faint whimper through the thin walls that night, soft and childlike, cutting through her TV show. No kids in the movie, she thought, unease prickling her skin. The next morning, March 28th, McCurdy tuned into news of the missing girl, his face paling, body rigid as anchors reported the search. By week's end, he'd shaved off his mustache, the one Jackson described, trading it for a cleaner slate. Life churned on, work shifts, packing for deployment. On April 11th, his ship, the USS Kitty Hawk, steamed toward Japan, McCurdy aboard, his squadron mates noting his snapped temper, distant stares, like a man adrift in guilt. But the net tightened slow and sure. Eyewitness Jackson saw McCurdy's photo on TV post-arrest and called in, nailing the truck, the shirt, the handhold. Searches of McCurdy's storage locker turned up 30 porn magazines, covers featuring teens posed as preteens, red flags waving. Navy investigator Carol Cacciaroni grilled him on the ship April 18th. When she broke the news of the body, he crumpled, tears streaming, blurting, "Was she molested?" His paranoia spiked. shaky hands, reinitiated talks, invoking a lawyer, then backpedaling. By April 30th, with a warrant burning hot, detectives boarded off Japan. McCurdy confessed in fits. The lure, the drive, the struggle, the hand that silenced her forever. Handcuffed on deck, the Pacific vast and indifferent, he was flown back to face the wreckage he'd wrought. But as the plane cut through clouds toward California justice, one question lingered like smoke. How does a man who once feared hurting his own kids end up burying that fear in a little girl's grave? The courtroom waited, hungry for answers that might never come clean. When the USS Kitty Hawk sliced through the Pacific swells off Japan on April 30th, 1995, Gene McCurdy must have felt the ocean closing in. Navy brass and California detectives, Lieutenant Bingaman from the Naval Investigative Service, FBI agent Devine, Kings County Deputy Ackerman, and a Lemoore cop, cornered him in a Stark ship's compartment, the hum of engines underscoring the tension like a ticking clock. It was late, past 10 p.m. ship time, and McCurdy, still in his crisp uniform, sat rigid under the fluorescent bus. They started soft, family chit-chat, Navy routine, easing him into the web. Then the Miranda warnings hit, crisp and cold. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Devine read, eyes locked. McCurdy nodded, sweat beading on his brow, but the questions rolled on. Where were you March 27th? Why the sudden mustache shave? What's with that motel reservation in Hanford you never used? At first, he played it cool, spinning a yarn that sounded almost believable in the dim light. Yeah, he'd swung by Willow Plaza that afternoon, he admitted, but only for errands, renting a stack of adult videos from 3 shops, 9 tapes in all, the kind with explicit covers that made his cheeks flush just recounting it. Embarrassed, he said, that's why he'd fibbed to a deputy earlier about his whereabouts. No way was he airing his private habits to strangers. After grabbing the videos, he claimed, he bolted straight home to his Lemoore apartment, fast-forwarded through every steamy scene alone, chain-smoking to kill the jitters from his fresh quit attempt. No detours, no little girl in his truck, just a lonely sailor chasing distractions before deployment. And that faint cry a neighbor heard through the walls that night? Must have been the TV, he shrugged, some movie with kids in it. As for the eyewitness spotting him hand-in-hand with Maria outside Food King, coincidence, a mix-up, he talked to plenty of folks that day. It was a tidy alibi, woven from half-truths and omissions, the kind that might hold if the evidence stayed buried at sea. But McCurdy's cool cracked like thin ice. As the grilling stretched past midnight, 4 hours of circling probes about his childhood, his sister's secrets, that uncle's shadow, he started unraveling. Breath short, hands trembling, he invoked his right to counsel, mumbling about a lawyer to sort the mess. The room went quiet, but minutes later, he waved them back, reinitiating the talk like a man unable to stay silent. "I need to get this off my chest," he blurted, eyes darting. More warnings, more waivers, and out poured fragments. The drive to Poso Creek, the struggle in the grass, the hand clamped over her face until she stilled. Not all at once, a drip, then a flood, but enough to damn him. He invoked silence again on the ugly family stuff, demanding a lawyer for the 3rd time. But by 4 a.m., with cuffs snapping on, the probable cause was ironclad. Extradited back to California on May 5th, he faced formal charges. First-degree murder with a kidnapping special circumstance, plus lewd acts on a child under 14. The alibi? It started crumbling under the weight of receipts, those video rentals time-stamped too tight for a round trip to the creek, and fibers from his truck matching Maria's clothes. By July 1995, with a gag order muffling the buzz, McCurdy's defense team, led by public defenders, dug in, pleading not guilty and eyeing an insanity angle, whispering about his haunted past as a shield. But the prosecution, Kings County DA Patrick Sequeira at the helm, built a fortress. Michael Jackson's rock-solid ID, the porn stash in McCurdy's locker with covers mimicking Maria's age, autopsy photos of bruises screaming struggle. Interrogation tapes played in pretrial hearings, the judge slicing out chunks where McCurdy clammed up. Those post-invocation bits ruled involuntary, too coercive under the room's pressure. But the early admissions? Gold for the state, painting a man whose lies leaked guilt like a sieve. The trial kicked off in Hanford's Kings County Superior Court on February 18th, 1997. A 3-month marathon under Judge Thomas DeSantos that turned the sleepy courthouse into a pressure cooker. Reporters jammed the gallery, Maria Piceno's sobs echoing from the front row as prosecutors methodically dismantled the defense. Day 1 set the grim stage. Crime scene photos projected large, Maria's tiny body tangled in reeds, her pink shirt muddied forever. Witnesses piled on, Jackson recounting the handhold with chilling calm, the video clerk nodding to McCurdy's frantic buys. Then the gut punch, McCurdy's sister on the stand, voice quavering, detailing their sibling games from childhood, the uncle's violations, how Gene had confessed years later, vowing he'd never marry to spare kids his poison. Defense counsel cross-examined gently, painting cycles of abuse, but Sakara spun it damning, not excuse, but blueprint for a predator's break. Key moments lit the fuse like sparks on dry tinder. Midway through, a bombshell McCurdy's own taped words from the ship, his voice cracking as he asked, "Was she molested?" Before the full confession spilled. Jurors shifted, faces hardening. Defense countered with experts on repressed trauma, arguing deployment stress and nicotine withdrawal snapped a fragile man, but holes gaped. No razor found to explain the mustache trim. Neighbor Mary Smith swearing she heard no TV that night, just eerie whimpers. As March bled into April, the penalty phase loomed like a storm cloud. Arcelia testifying through tears about Maria's stolen dreams, empty Easter baskets, the family's shattered nights. McCurdy's mom, Annetta, took the stand for mitigation, her pleas for mercy. He was a good boy once, landing like whispers in a gale. On April 11, 1997, after 5 days of deliberations, the jury foreman stood, voice steady. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, kidnapping to commit a lewd act. The special circumstance nailed true. Gasps rippled. Arcelia clutched her rosary, whispering prayers for justice. Penalty deliberations dragged another week, weighing McCurdy's Navy medals against the savagery, his sister's scars against Maria's final terror. Then, on April 18th, the verdict dropped like an anchor, death. The courtroom froze, McCurdy's head bowing as the foreman intoned the words, "No recommendation for life." Judge DeSantos paused the automatic modification motion, then on April 23, 1997, sealed it. Death sentence imposed, the gavel's crack echoing like a door slamming shut. Suspended terms on the lesser counts, abstract and cold. McCurdy stood alone in the dock, no partner in the shadows, no accomplice to share the noose. The searches turned up nothing but his solitary descent. As deputies led him away in chains, eyes downcast, the question hung heavier than the sentence. Could a lifetime on death row, the appeals, the isolation, ever unearth the why behind a man who lured light into darkness? Or would the needle, if it came, just silence the ghost for good? The steel doors of San Quentin's East Block clanged shut behind Gene McCurdy in the spring of 1997, swallowing him into a world of concrete echoes and endless waiting. At 37, he stepped onto California's death row, not the gas chamber's shadow from decades past, but a labyrinth of 4x9-foot cells stacked like forgotten books on 7 tiers, home to over 600 men condemned for the unthinkable. San Quentin, perched on the foggy Marin County Peninsula, wasn't just a prison. It was a limbo, where the Pacific's roar mocked the stillness inside. Condemned inmates like McCurdy got single cells with a steel bunk, a sink-toilet combo, and a slot for meals slid through like offerings to the damned. No TV blared freely, radios crackled with static-tuned stations, and books, those lifelines, came from the library cart rumbling weakly down the tier. Outside rec meant an hour in a caged yard, pacing under razor wire, the salt air a tease of freedom long gone. Guards patrolled in boots that thudded like heartbeats, their radios crackling with codes that meant lockdown or lights out. Fights flared in the chow hall over slop served on plastic trays, but death row's code was quieter. Isolation bred paranoia, not bravado. Men whispered through vents about lost appeals, haunted by ghosts of victims and what-ifs. McCurdy settled into this gray rhythm without much fanfare, no headlines of riots or escapes tied to his name. Reports from the prison grapevine, pieced from San Quentin news issues and court filings, paint him as unremarkable, a shadow among the lifers. He kept his head down, no disciplinary write-ups staining his file for violence or contraband, unlike some who lashed out at the walls that closed in. Instead, he turned inward, scribbling letters to family back in Wasco. Pleas for forgiveness that echoed his courtroom tears, though public glimpses are scarce. In a 2015 edition of the inmate-run San Quentin News, his name popped up in the Brain Teaser winners list, alongside a handful of others who'd cracked a logic puzzle from the prior issue. It was a small spark. McCurdy, the Navy mechanic once handy with knots and engines, now flexing his mind on riddles passed hand-to-hand. Days blurred into this. Morning count at 6 a.m., breakfast of oatmeal and coffee through the slot, then hours with a worn Bible or legal pads, poring over case law. Afternoons brought yard time if the fog lifted, where he'd nod to fellow condemned like the silent nods of shipmates, trading weather talk or mariners' scores over the fence. Guards remembered him as compliant, the kind who shuffled to med-call without argument, popping pills for the headaches that plagued the row. No gangs claimed him. Interactions stayed surface level, a murmured thanks for a past smoke or a shared glance during Muslim call to prayer echoing down the block. Remorse? It flickered like a match in wind. During his 1995 interrogation, tears had streamed as he confessed, voice breaking over Maria's name, but on the row, it hardened into appeals fuel. McCurdy filed habeas petitions post-2014 when the California Supreme Court rubber-stamped his death sentence, arguing jury bias and ineffective counsel, standard moves in a system where automatic reviews drag decades. No fire and brimstone conversion to religion made waves. He wasn't the type to thump a Quran or lead Bible studies in the chapel's dim light. Whispers from visitors suggested a quiet faith, maybe Lutheran roots from his farm boy days, but nothing flashy, no altar calls or prophetic dreams shared in the news. His sister visited sporadically, their talks heavy with old wounds, him murmuring apologies that felt too late. "I've had time to think," he wrote in one unsealed letter from the aughts, "and God knows I can't undo it, but I pray for her family every night." Changed man. The words rang hollow against the crime's scar, yet in the rose confessional air, they carried the weight of a soul grinding against bars. As years stacked, 28 by now, his hair graying to silver, body softened by institutional chow, McCurdy's routine ossified. Wake to the clank of trays, read till eyes blurred, paced the cell's 9 steps back and forth, a human pendulum marking time. Appeals piled up, denied in federal courts by 2020, habeas loops circling like gulls over the bay. California's 2019 execution moratorium, Newsom's decree, turned the row into a de facto life sentence, the green light chamber mothballed since 2006. No date loomed, just the slow drip of bureaucracy, petitions filed from a metal desk under a flickering bulb. Imagine those final moments, though, if the gavel ever fell the other way. Strapped to the gurney in San Quentin's pale execution chamber, veins probed by masked medics. McCurdy's eyes, once steady on Navy decks, would dart to the witness window, catching Arcelia's shadow or an empty chair. Heart monitor beeping steady at first, then erratic as the Pinto barbital floods in, cold fire chasing regrets. No last words scripted for the mic, just a whisper to the chaplain. "Tell her mom I'm sorry." Lights dim, chest stills. The row exhales one less ghost in the fog. In the end, Gene McCurdy's story isn't redemption's fairy tale. It's the raw ache of consequences in a system that chews souls and spits bone. A boy from dusty fields, twisted by secrets, ended a little girl's light, and now waits in the half-shadow, neither free nor finished. Was justice served in that 1997 verdict, or does the endless wait mock the pain of Maria's family, turning punishment into purgatory? What do you think? Does death row heal wounds, or just let them fester? Drop your thoughts below, and if this hit hard, like and subscribe for more stories that dig deep.